Thanks. Once again, I'm Justin Shorb, and I'm going to give a quick little overview, but it's probably more in depth than you want of licensing and how that works in the concept of OER. And I did put a link in the chat to today's spot on the LibreText Academy Online course that we're using for this. And we're going to reference that later on. So if you want to go ahead and bring that open, I'm going to share my screen. All right. So you should be able to get to that mastering open licensing, and there are some screenshots and things down below and some links that I'll reference to later so that you have that. But for now, I'm going to get back to the slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about OER licensing, what open means, and how it's implemented in LibreText as a whole. That's going to start off with a bit of philosophy behind the OER, the legalities and the ethics of OER, and some practical applications from within our libraries and our infrastructure in general. So to start off with what OER is, basically, I think a lot of people have an intuitive sense for it these days, but that intuitive sense is dictated largely by who on your campus that you've talked to, what you've been experienced using, and the platforms that you've used. So one really good quote from the Hewlett Foundation, which did a lot of the early pioneering work in OER and funding OER projects, is that open educational resources, or OER, are free and openly licensed educational materials that can be used for teaching, learning, research, and other purposes. So in bold there, you can see openly licensed. So they really focused in on when somebody releases something out to be used, are they licensing it in such a way that it's open for people to use in their classroom in their educational communities. A more recent one, after many years of debating and back and forth, the UN released this definition, which is open educational resources, or OER, are teaching, learning, or research materials that are in the public domain or released with intellectual property licenses that facilitate the free use, adaptation, and distribution of resources. And one thing that you wanted to point out there is they've added in the public domain there. So if you're not familiar, public domain means once you publish something with a license that is all rights reserved, it's yours, it's copyrighted. After many years, I think it's 95 years right now in the US, that becomes openly available and is part of the public domain to be able to be used by anybody. So copyright does expire. And that addition to there means that those things can be treated much like you would anything that's openly licensed, because you can adapt them, you can distribute them, you can modify them. Open licenses allows content to be free, as in freedom of speech, or free to use it however you want, not necessarily free from cost. And this is a big deal because a lot of people conflate OER efforts on campus with ZTC efforts on campus. Zero textbook cost is not the same thing as open textbook use. And we'll talk a little bit about how that works here. Examples might include the GNU free document license, which is one of the older licenses. Creative Commons licensing, public domain, which I mentioned is something that's expired copyright essentially, or somebody who just makes something and releases it to the public domain, and customized copyleft licensing that you might have heard of. These sorts of licensing, another one you might have heard of is MIT licensing. A lot of these are open licenses that make things free to use, just like we have a lot of invested work here at LibreText with. So with the exception of public domain content, authors do not relinquish ownership of OER content with open licenses. Instead, they establish requirements and allowable permission for content use. So example, requiring attribution of the author, forbidding commercial activities of the materials, or requiring modified content to be shared under that same license. So in other words, open materials are not just free things you take, you use however you want. There are still restrictions. So there are some restrictions, and it's up to the author to decide what those restrictions are, but they remain OER if they follow some basic guidelines of what open means. And that's really difficult to describe, because I think it's difficult to really do in English, because the word free really does kind of mix between two different concepts you might have in your head. There is free as in liberty, and then there's free as in cost, right? And I'm going to steal straight from Delmar here because I think that it's a good example. liberty and cost. Being free, as in libre, from the Romance languages, is very different than the free that you would use for something that is free in the Romance languages that are not English. So for instance, libre versus gratis in Spanish, right? So those differentiations happen a lot in other languages, but in English, we're stuck using the word free for both of those things, which then conflate those two things in our heads. But it's important to recognize that those really are two different meanings. The liberty, the freedom to use something, and then the cost of something being free. Those are two different things. So open is what we use instead of just saying it's free to be used. And it's the opposite of closed. You're not restricting that access. You're not restricting who can use it. You're not restricting the ability to put those things out there for other people to use or mix or however they want. So for open being free, liberty, but how free is it going to be? Is it available for everybody? Can they use it in however they would like, wherever they'd like, in whatever form they'd like? And then also, we do need to think about open being free as in cost. Is it a free material for you to use? Do people get to use it without paying some sort of a fee to use it? And unfortunately, all things that are OER are not free. But they might all, hopefully they should all follow these, what I'd call the main core thrusts or cohesive factors that go into being OER. And these were done by Wiley when he was trying to define what exactly it means open for OER. So those 5 ones are retain, reuse, revise, remix, and redistribute. So retain means content can be reused in its unaltered original format, so people can take it, they can use it in their classrooms or even like on a presentation, but the right to use the content and they have the right to use that content in many, many ways. So they can hold that content, they can put it on their computer, they can use it in their courses, they can use it publicly, they can post it on a presentation somewhere. They can hold that and they can reuse that material, but they have to attribute it in some way if it's required by the author. Authors can also say, just take it, that's public domain. But then reuse, so that means that they're going to take that content and retain it for personal archives or reference. The right to make, own, and control copies of the content. So I've downloaded it, I have my own version of it, I'm going to duplicate it, I'm going to store it, and then I'm going to manage it. So in other words, that's going to become part of your own personal library kind of a thing. So you can use that in any way you want to, make collections with it. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But it's still just a thing that you've taken from somebody and you're going to use as is. But things can also be revisable. So if they're revisable, then content can be modified or altered to suit specific needs. So that's the right to adapt, adjust, modify. I would even say maybe customize and alter the content itself and translate that content even into another language. So that's revising the content. So this is something that OER should have. They should have the ability to revise that content that you have in some way, shape, or form. You can remix that content. It can be adapted with other similar content to create something new. Maybe take this thing and that thing, put it together and make a module from that. The right to combine the original or revised content with other material to create something new. So in other words, incorporate that into some sort of a mashup. So if you're going to be able to remix that and put it into different contexts even. And then the final one, which is the one that we care about an awful lot here, is redistribute that. So content can be shared with anyone else in its original or altered format. The right to share copies of the original content, your revisions, your remixes with others, and give the content to a friend, for instance. So redistribute is kind of a crux of why this can be. We have some people in the waiting room for, sorry, keeps popping up on my screen if one of the other hosts can check it. So with that redistribute one, that's a really important one. And it's one that kind of clashes with a lot of our mental image, because if you own something, a part of you might feel that if it's yours, then you have the right of who gets to use it. So your best friend can use it, or your worst enemy can use it. And there's nothing you can do about it if it's open, right? So that's part of OER, is it's available to be used once you put it out there. OER is for everyone. It is free in that case as well. So those are the main 5 tenets. You might see a lot of people take those and expand on them, but those are the ones that we tend to like to use here because they do encompass what we really see as what OER stands for and what OER means in our community. So this really does kind of blow up your head if you're into the very traditional mind of academia or publishing and business models. because you think about how valuable things are, and you think of the value of things, the value of your intellectual property, the value of your publishing, how to make money. That's what publishers tend to do a lot. And then, of course, most business models, if you're thinking about how you're going to make money off of material. LibreText has long held the belief that we would like to take over the world and to free the textbook from all of these constraints of that mindset. And I think that this open paradigm shift is really, and I put this capital OER versus lowercase OER, because then we get into the issue where some OER these days, especially, has become not actually free. So you can have something that is freely available to be used in your classroom, that the content can be remixed, the content can be reordered, you can revise it, and you can distribute it however you want, but it's actually behind a paywall. So there are companies out there that do have publishing platforms where they call themselves open because they make OER materials. That means the authors have released the content to be used in any way, shape, or form people want, with underneath their certain guidelines. But they have decided that access to those are gatekept in some way where you have to pay for that. So you will start finding things that I've heard the word open washing, kind of like whitewashing, but open washing a platform where a company might say, hey, we have a bunch of OER materials. Doesn't your school really like open materials? All you have to do is have your library pay us $20,000, and now you have a platform for publishing open materials. And that's something that we don't like as a fundamental thing, but it doesn't keep people from using it. But it's also something I want to kind of point out that does happen, especially as we move on to how you might want to license your materials. So really, really against that, but we want to make sure people know that. But what we do want to get across is that even if somebody has put something behind a paywall that is accessible only through a paywall, but there is an open license on it, and it is free for you to use and to bring into the LibreText library, and then put it into our library so that you can remix it and to do whatever else that the license allows you. The fact that it's licensed means that it's licensed to be freely used, as in freedom, as in liberty, as in LibreTexts, right? So those materials are available, and we do have a large amount of people that we do work with harvesting a lot of these open access materials, because although we are a publishing platform, and as you found out in the last day and a half, we are also a lot more than a publishing platform. Primarily, we are a library of OER materials. So we bring in other materials just like a library would put collections together, and those collections can be used in your classrooms to remix into your own books, into your teaching resources, and to make really your ability to be a professor be as impactful as possible for your students at the lowest cost for your students as possible. So let's talk a little bit about what we mean when we talk about these licenses, so you know when you find something whether you can use it or not. As I mentioned, public domain. This is things that were originally copyright by some shape or form, but legally after 95 years, those things all become in the public domain. The big example that I knew of, and Delmar also has used in the past, is recently Disney lost the copyright to the original Mickey Mouse images, right? So the very first Tugboat Willie images became into the public domain. So you can use those images exactly as are. But you know, the newer ones are modifications that they've made. So those ones are still under copyright. So you have to take care of like making sure you know what's in the public domain, what's not. And I put a note that some audio recordings are still under some other laws about public domain. So careful with those if you're looking at them. Some of the very early OER license, not OER license, but open licensing was through the GNU public license. This is what Wikipedia originally was built with. It was a large group of people that built a lot of freedom, and they even put the free as in freedom on their little logos there. And you might see that running around out there. But the most common by far these days, and the one that you'll see the most commonly on LibreText, is the Creative Commons licenses. And those ones, we're going to go into what all those different little symbols mean so that you know what they are. And to be honest, we're going to be encouraging here to use the CC licenses, because that's the ones that are most clear for figuring out what you can use and how you can use those in your materials. I wanted to put one other thing in here, which is that government data sets, if they're data sets from the government, they were paid for by the population, therefore they are available. So if you see any data sets that are out there on a .gov website, those are all freely public domain, and you can find those. And a lot of those other sources can be used in educational purposes and what they call fair use. I would encourage you to avoid using them if you can, because there are some weird gray areas in fair use. And I wanted to just show one Google search where I searched all of libretext.org for educational use and fair use and copyright. And right away, you can see we have 4 libraries where people have been discussing what educational fair use is for copyright things. So that's the humanities library, the workforce library, social science library, biology library. All of these people have actually been talking with their students about how to do fair use for education. So it's a very complicated matter, but it's also very important. And I didn't even want to try to make a little snippet for you, because the field you're in really will tell a lot about what resources people have commonly found to be fair use or usable, quite friendly. And people have written about it. So I encourage you to go kind of take a look around LibreText for that. Within Creative Commons, there are some basic rules about when you release something publicly, what does that mean? What are the boundaries that the author of those materials create? Yes, Francis says, what fair use is shifting in the courts quite often. Yes. So that's a very sticky issue in general. Try to avoid it, but if you're going to use it, go look to see what's out there and what you can use, and then make sure you attribute it as much as you can and when you use it. So within Creative Commons, I put a little C versus CC. There's a little copyright versus Creative Commons. That's kind of like, I think, a cute little way to remember what it is. It is a license. It's a license that's not copyright, and it's a Creative Commons license. So you always see that little circle with a CC. And then followed by that CC, you'll usually see some other designations. These are the icons or the letters that go against them. The most common one that you'll see as much as possible is by. Really, I think that's what makes the difference between something that is kind of a very more like public domain versus not public domain. Public domain, if you're just releasing it Creative Commons without even an attribution, then there's really no license on it. There's just use it. Don't even say where you got it. Nobody cares where it came from. It's just Creative Commons, public domain, CC. So you'll almost never see that by itself. You'll see that CC by with that attribution. So that means you let other people copy, distribute, display it, use your work in any way that you want to, modify that work, put some googly eyes on it, whatever you want to do to it, as long as they say that it was derived from something that you made. So they should cite you as the original author. If you want someone to take it and use it and then not add any more boundaries to how that's used, then you're going to specify that you want them to share alike. So that means I want them to take it, use it, modify it, stick googly eyes on it, and then distribute it, but you can't add any more rules to it. So you can't use any of the other rules on here. You can't restrict it from further use. You must release it with the same CC by SA that this one was used by. Okay, so you can't restrict its use any more than I've already done. Otherwise, if it's just CC by, somebody could say that they're going to restrict how people use their copy of yours. And what I mean by further restrictions are the last 2 things on there. That's the non-commercials and the no derivatives. So non-commercial means I don't think anyone should use this in a way that they're going to earn money from it. Okay, and I'll go into a little more detail on that. And then the no derivatives clause says that they can only use it exactly how it was. So a couple scenarios here. If you make some, let's say, image, right? Benny, our owl, and we release that with just a by, that means anyone can take that Benny, they can throw a hat on it, they can throw a coat on it, a new t-shirt on it, and they can distribute that. And there's nothing we can do except for they're just going to say that it was modified from the one that was made by LibreText. If we release it as, and then somebody could take that and then stick a non-commercial license on it, for instance. And then they're saying, well, you could use the original Benny and you could charge for that as a version, or you could take my version with the yellow coat on it, and I'm going to say that one's non-commercial. So my variation of their work is now non-commercial. Does that make sense? I hope it makes a little sense. Or I could take LibreText version of Benny. I could then make some change on it, put a yellow coat on it, and then I could say no derivatives, which means, yeah, sure, go ahead and modify the original Benny, put your own clothes on it, but if you take mine with a yellow coat on it, do not add anything to that yellow coat. So don't take that yellow coat and put a red hat on it. That's not allowed. My variation is now non-derivative. No one can change it. Okay? So if I take mine and I do by, it's by LibreText, but then I put share alike on it. That means whatever derivatives you might make from it, you can't then restrict it to be non-commercial. You can't then restrict your variation to be non-derivative. You have to share it the same way I shared it. Okay, so far so good. And you can mix and match these. So you could do, I want to release this image as attribution. I made it. So if you use it, please say that that's it. But I'm going to stick no derivatives and share alike. Share alike doesn't make any sense in that case. But I could do non-commercial and say share alike, so then everyone else would have to do non-commercial as well. So there's a whole entire complexity of how can you reuse things when somebody modifies things. And there's, as you can see, a whole spectrum of what open means in context of Creative Commons. So how free is it? That liberty is really what we're talking about when we say openness in Creative Commons. Cost, nothing about this has anything to do with costs, really, except for the non-commercial part a little bit. But like I said, you can put a lot of this stuff still behind some sort of paywall. So we're going to go into our LibreText and talk a little bit with some examples of how these work. First one, I just wanted to say in Adapt, since we talked about that a lot so far, at the bottom of every student version of a question, you'll see this little attribution button that pops up with a license. So any student or anybody who's using your problem can know the license and the author. It was authored by Delmar Larson. And it is, you can click on that to see what that license means. So this one was released just by. So you can feel free to modify, alter, and change this question and use it. I think that that's a very, very common one, is CC BY for licensing and Adapt, but we'll talk a little bit more about other licensing you could do. Now, when we get to textbooks, so textbooks and homework systems and homework sets gets to be a little more confusing. And I'm going to walk you through what can be described as a remix versus a collection. So they're both, I'm going to make something that is a package group of stuff, whether that's going to be a book of a bunch of other people's chapters or a mixture of your chapters and their chapters, or you're going to make a collection of a bunch of things that you found that are all OER and they're great. Both a collection and a remix reuse or combine content from other sources. Okay, they're taking OER material and they're making some new package of those things. If you're using a remix, then that collection of things, which I'm using the word collection again here, but that group of things that you put together for some purpose, you can then apply a license to that group. So you're saying, I am going to put this group together, and I think this group of things has some meaning by itself that I want you to attribute to me. Then I can have a collection, which is, I have a bunch of stuff in here that's all OER from different people with different licenses, and it's all great, and feel free to use it. It's a collection I made, right? So that doesn't really have, in that case, it's not really a intellectual property thing. It is a group of stuff that you've collected and you think are useful, all right? Intuitively, they feel difficult, but on a big picture scale, I think they're easy to see the difference. But when you get into what are my pieces in my collection, it can feel very complicated what those mean. So whenever you're feeling confused, when I start talking about different things in different places, ask yourself, am I currently making a remix of this, or am I making a collection right now? And that can help you to think about whether or not what license should apply in this case. For your knowledge, LibreText in the libraries applies licensing at the page level, so we can get all the way down to the page. So we can make a remix that is a page of a material that's from different things. And for a collection, really down even at the sub-page level, you can have a collection that has things that are smaller than a page in there. And I'm going to show you how this can get super confusing and difficult. This is a book by Anna Mills on how arguments work. And she's very good at licensing and lots of things to think about how to build a book very clearly. And in our Creative Commons, in our Commons, which is our catalog, her book entry here actually shows you, and I'll zoom in, that her book is 223 pages. There are some restrictions in her book. Some of her book is non-commercial. Some of her book is no derivatives. In her book, she's got 148 pages that are licensed as Creative Commons by NC, so non-commercial. But you could share that, meaning you could add a no derivatives clause to that because it's not share alike. 45 of the pages in her book are by NCSA. So that means you can't change the restrictions on it by making it no derivatives. 28 pages are undeclared, which more than likely means that she has taken material that is OER with different licenses, and those pages have been just set to be a collection of stuff. So none of that stuff is hers in there. So she didn't declare a license for it because it's just a collection of other people's stuff. So she has some pages that just has other people's paragraphs, other people's images, things like that. Then she got one page that is a no derivatives page. More than likely, she remixed from some other author who made their whole book no derivatives. So that now carries its own license. And one page that's all public domain. Maybe she wrote it and just released it to the public, or maybe it's just a bit of text from maybe a public government website that has no restrictions ability to it. And obviously, that's very, very small number of pages. So the breakdown of this textbook is much more complicated than you'd expect. And one of the things that people ask us quite frequently at LibreText is, we would like to use your book. What license does it have? And our answer is, I don't know. What are you talking about license? What part of it? What paragraph are you talking about? What image are you talking about? Which makes it really difficult for us to accommodate. Really, it makes us difficult to accommodate for-profit places, because they'll want to just take it and have one single sign-off and say, oh, this book is all non-commercial? Check, I'm going to be able to use it. Well, that becomes very difficult. It also becomes very difficult for people to take our books and, let's say, put them into some other publishing platform. Because a lot of publishers that might be able to say, hey, we love making OER stuff. Let's make your OER book into one in our platform and let people modify it. Very difficult to do that and maintain all the licensing that we maintain at LibreText. For users of LibreText, this is great because we do all this automatically for you. So you don't need to think about what content you're using has what licensing, and we'll go into showing you how this actually works on our libraries here. Okay. So what we have something is called auto attribution. So we do have something in our libraries that auto attributes things that you might take and remix from other places. This is our infrastructure to facilitate auto attribution of remix content and to ensure compliance with licenses of intellectual property. We do this for you. It's built into our system. Essentially, you can copy content from one part of LibreText into another part of LibreText, and it comes with the license already, quote unquote, spray painted onto it. So it comes over with its own metadata attached to it that says where it came from and what the license was and who the author was. And in many cases, we introduce license logic so that if something is, for instance, no derivatives, then you put it in your textbook as a page, then you won't be able to turn that into something editable. You have to use it as is. No derivatives clauses are really a pain in the neck, and I'll talk a little bit later about why we might not want them. But that does mean that if somebody that you're using their textbook and you bring it over into your page and it's a no derivatives one, then even if there is a typo in it, you can't change that typo. Even if they misspelled a word, you can't fix that misspelling because it's been labeled as no derivatives. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how this looks like in LibreText. So if, let's say, I want to take one paragraph from one page and stick it into my page in my book. So I want to take just that paragraph. I really like that paragraph. It describes something really well, but I don't want to just copy and paste it because that's wrong, right? I'm not want to plagiarize. I don't want to take something that somebody else wrote. So I want to make sure I can give them the right attribution and credit. So when you're editing a page, you can take the edited the page from one place, put it into another place, and then you'll get that into your book. Once you get into a book page, then you'll see that there are actually 3 licenses here at work. I have my book page, which is, well, this is technically Delmar's, but this is mine, which is 4.1, and it's shared under this license. And this remix is curated by this person. That includes content from this page, which is licensed this, and this page, which is written by this person, licensed that, and the original source. So already you can see at the bottom of every LibreText page, we have told the users of this page that there is content from essentially 3 different sources. In this case, Delmar wrote 2 pages, but we'll get over that. There is the person who combined everything into a page. There is the person who wrote the first page that got put into there, and people who wrote the second page that got put into there. And if you click on that toggle block level attributions right there, what that will do is actually highlight every paragraph and then give you a little tooltip that shows you what paragraphs were written by who. So for instance, if I wrote this part here, that wouldn't have a highlight. This part was copied from somebody else's, so that one gets that attribution. And as far as I know, we're the only people who do paragraph by paragraph attributions in the OER world. I wanted to give one little shout out. This is an example from somebody, Fabi Morales. She's one of the members of our first cohort. LibreText Academy has cohorts of authors who work together to build books. That's one of our new Academy programs. And she's going to talk about this on Friday, but her book, I think, is really great and gives a good example of this. So this is an example of her text page on health disparities and inequalities. And when you click the toggle, you see there's some white text at top, there's white text at the bottom, and then there's a chunk from one page and a chunk from another page. So what Fabi wanted to do was she wanted one page that was on health disparities and inequalities for her book, but she wanted to include things from another person's book that ended up being on 2 pages. So this one, Erin, had a book that had one section on racial and ethnic health inequalities and one on systemic racism. And Fabi wanted those to be in 1 page because for her class, she's going to truncate that. And it's a shorter bit than it was in Erin's book, which is much longer. So she wrote an introduction that included both, a conclusion that included both, but used content from 2 different pages in the other book. It's a way for her to customize that material and also modify it in a way where you can see, yes, this is clearly a remix because it has content by Fabi. It has content from other people with different licenses, and then some content by Fabi again. And I'll show you this book live. I don't know why my Zoom feature is not working. Oh, there we go. So this is a copy of her book. And as you can see at the bottom, you can see the 2 different places. Those are links that go off to those other books. So you can see where they're from and the number of her page here. It's currently curated by LibreText because this is actually an unpublished book. It'll get her name on it once we publish it. And it's a not declared license. And I will tell you right now, it's not declared because when she asked me what her license should be, I said, write the book first. And when we publish it, we'll figure out what your license should be, because it's a complicated thing and who knows where she's going to get all of her material. But she can still go through and you can see where each of these are from. That's a link to that book and a license for that section, a link to that book and a license for that section along the way. And then the white part with no colored highlights, that is Fabi's work that she's written herself. And if you want to know about the process of learning all this within the cohort, make sure you're here on Friday for that success story. How you assign a license for something that you've derived from somebody else or you've remixed from somebody else is actually a very complicated thing, because you need to figure out what are the licenses that are associated with each part that you're going to combine, and then whether it's compatible with the license elsewhere, and then whether you're going to put a license on the top of it. I'll say right now, if you want to not worry about that, then you can just make your page only stuff from other people, and then it's a collection, and then you don't need to worry about the license because it's just whatever the license is for all the parts, you're fine. If you want to have your own material mixed in with their material on a page, then you've got to identify which material is which, and then what the license is for your material, embedded within the context of the other material. So this is a chart that's from Creative Commons. It has public domain. It has whether it's by SA, by NC, and then whether or not these things are compatible to be blended in one new content together. And we're going to do a little exercise on that in a little bit. But that mostly I want to give you the chart to say that it does exist. You don't have to create it, but it does give you the ability to kind of see what can come about from that. So at this point, I'm going to actually throw you guys into some workout rooms, because you need to exercise these skills. Breakout rooms and to work on a couple things. So I have 6 different resources here that should be able to identify in some way what that license is. So click on a few of them. You don't have to do all 6 of them, maybe the ones that are interesting to you to look at. Take a look at those and see if you can identify what the licensing is for these things. And then for each pair or for a pair that you're thinking about, see if you can figure out what those licensing are. Okay, so that's task 1 in the breakout rooms. Task 2 is I am going to give you a thought experiment with 5 different things One is a paragraph that I wrote. One is a page where I combine sources together to make a new page with my own work. One is a books that I remixed and authored portions of the book, and then adapt question that I authored. And I want you to ask 3 different questions of yourself. I want to figure out in my head how it could be reused by somebody else. How could someone take that image and use it somewhere else? What are the possibilities of changing the images, of modifying the images, or of selling the image, putting it on something, or the text itself? Think about, brainstorm different ways that you could use that, and then how you can monetize that. So is there ways that people could monetize that in some way? So in other words, do the brainstorming to think, do I need to be worried about commercialization or not? Is that something that I'm concerned about? Remember, people can still use non-commercial things. For instance, I know of at least one homework system out there that uses openly licensed books, but claims that they're not selling the book, they're selling the homework, right? So could that book still be used in that kind of a situation? Or what does it mean to sell my book? Okay, not just access. And then last, questions. How are people going to use questions in different ways? And then how could they monetize that? And lastly, think about how you would license that. And I'll give you my answers after of what I would personally do. It's not a dictation or rules. And I am going to, how can I do this in such a way that I won't give away my answers? I will just stop sharing for 1 second. That's going to be the easiest way.
Were you going to copy those links?
No, that's why I'm sharing again. So in the link that I sent you for today's course, the Mastering Open Licensing, that has 2 sections. One is that interactive exercise with the links there and that chart. So you can use that to think about how things could pair. And number 2 is that slide that I just showed you there with the examples, and then that little guide there for thinking about the licensing of how you might use those. So those are the 2 activities to think about. We only have around 15 minutes or so to go through these things. So I'm going to give you a breakout room for about 15 minutes. And because when you go to the breakout room, you're not going to have access to my presentation anymore, I put it on this side, this Academy Online course, so that you can follow along there. Again, don't spend a lot of time doing all of these links because you won't. So save at least 5-10 minutes to think about as a discussion how you'd go about this. So divide your time a little bit. You're all professors, right? Or academicians of some sort. So you've had to tell people to map it up and move on. And we'll get back here, I'll say about not quarter two, about 5-2. Does that sound good, Delmar?
That works.
So we'll get breakout rooms and go to 5-2. And I will do automatically. How many people we got here?
27.
27. So we'll do, I think we'll do, I think you guys all might end up in there, but if the leaders don't want to stick around, but you can feel free to stick around and join the conversation. But I'll be back in the main room. All right, Neil. Welcome back. Welcome back, everybody. Hopefully that was engaging discussion. Remember, the last column doesn't really have right answers. It might have some wrong ones. Nope, I think I forgot to actually, I think I did it. You guys
Hi,
can see
we had a
PowerPoint.
question.
Yeah.
May I ask?
Yep.
Hey, so this was such a good question. This was from Jan in our group. So we didn't get very far with all the tasks, but we did discuss the first two bullet point resources on the list. And the first was a Wikipedia article about LibreText.
Yep.
So what Jan brought up was, and we identified the license, the Wikipedia license at the bottom, which I think is consistently used across Wikipedia, CC BY 4.0. And Jan's question, which is a good one because it causes you to think, is that the references within that article, they themselves, the content within them, is not held under or licensed under CC BY 4.0. So that's something I think she was thinking there needed to be clarification on, because it gets only the content written above those references essentially is what's licensed. The rest is for academic the references for scholarship and academic attribution, and they themselves, if you would click into them, they are not covered.
Yep.
Exactly. So this is a yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so the references, the list of references could be considered a collection, right?
Right.
And you could have some sort, you could call it a remix or something like that. So the
Could
list
that list be CC BY?
I
Let
mean,
me step in here.
yeah,
Okay,
go
thanks.
ahead and step in. I will real quick before you say that. For those of you that might be confused, this is actually CC BY SA, not CC BY. So just to clarify, because at the bottom it does say this is a share alike license.
Oh, I apologize. Sorry.
No, that's okay. I just wanted to clarify because this is being recorded.
Yeah.
But yeah,
that doesn't
take it from
affect
there.
that. So titles are not copyrightable. So the concept of something being copyrighted is the concept of something being creative and then justified by having a license to protect it. So if you can argue that something is not creative, and people argue that things that are not even full sentences don't constitute as a creative concept, that are not licensed. They could be trademarked. That's a different issue, but they can't be copyrighted. This is the underlying argument that many people are saying about AI, is that the content that's created from AI is not a creative content. It is a mathematical construction content and therefore shouldn't be copyrighted. Although some people challenge that for other purposes, and there are some exceptions off of it. So tables, for example, in general are not copyrightable, and titles are not copyrightable. So that stuff down there is more public domain than any license that would be conflicting with the CC BY share alike 4.0 license that
Thank you. Good point.
And
And
I'll also
some
add
of those are government websites, which means
yeah.
that they're going to be public domain.
Yeah, but you
if you
don't.
go-
But the actual what it referenced to doesn't matter for what we're dealing with. So you can have references to lots of closed things. It's just whether the actual reference itself constitutes a copyrightable content, and it does not.
So
I was
Deborah,
gonna
what you're
point out,
saying is material generated for an LLM is not copyrighted?
This is still on the edge of legality right now. It's still being in the courts, but for the last year and a half or so, or 2 years, the general consensus is that the outcome of large language models is not creative, does not involve human activity in constructing it, and therefore is not copyrightable. However, the debate comes in is that what that model was trained on was copyrightable, was creative. So are you just basically using AI to wipe away the copyright of the original source? And that is where the arguments that AI is theft comes in. And to be honest, I actually think that's true, but that's a different point than what we have right now.
To go along with that idea, that if you go to the chemistry library, a lot of the libraries, you might find that we have some things that are books that are off with authors in parentheses, or things that are maps. So just along the same lines that titles are not copyrightable and lists of titles are not copyrightable, tables of contents are not copyrightable. So this is the same table of contents here that is in the copyright book, but it is not their content. It is our own content. So this is an OER version of that book in the same order, but the collection is completely different than the creative work that is under the copyright of that book. So there are lots of nuances.
And to master it, you need more than 1 hour discussion, which is why there's an Academy Online course in order to be able to get you going. Or you can go directly to Creative Commons and go through their training system.
Yep, they do have like I think you mentioned one time it takes about a week to get through their training. I was going to go through.
They have a multi-week course, actually.
Yeah.
That's like 6 weeks.
There's a lot that you can get into in it. And then one of the things that we tried to make LibreText good at was doing most of it for you, the complicated parts, and which is keeping track of those. I'm not sure, Joy, what you mean by if you like content from a source that's undeclared. You meaning you want to use it in your own remix? If you want to use it in your own remix, go ahead and use it in your remix. It'll carry the undeclared over. And if that person ever does declare a copyright on it, it will update with that copyright when they do that.
So the undeclared is for the whole page, but the content on the page is oftentimes licensed in something else. So when you actually copy and paste that content, it comes in with the specific license of that content. Just as a clarification.
Perfect. So some things that I think about when I would do it. So a picture, those are kind of weird. One, that's a picture of me. And it is our logo and our branding. So we don't really want people that could be using it to like create some sort of branding and say that their stuff is LibreText stuff if it's not our stuff. I don't really want people to put googly eyes on my face. So I think about all the ways they could put it on a pillow or something like that. So for an image, there's a lot of ways you could take that, modify it in ways that I really would not like, and we don't want our branding to be used in ways that we don't like. We'd like them to ask us permission to use any of that. So if this was going to be released in Creative Commons, I probably would license it with no derivatives and non-commercial.
Wouldn't it be best to make that a trademark?
Yes, that would be the best choice, and we have trademarked our logo itself, but my picture of myself there, yes. But from a Creative Commons license, I just want to give a really, really plain example of something that you would definitely not want people to make any derivatives from. You would definitely not want them people to use it. But you're right, the trademark really encompasses that next level, which is ask permission to use it, because this is still technically OER if it was done that way. But I kind of just threw an image in there.
Yeah, let me mention one quick thing. The intellectual property owner has the rights to do whatever he, she, or they want to do with the content. So each of those 3 pictures, 2 are owned by LibreText, and I can claim the picture of Justin is owned by LibreText, and therefore we can do whatever we want with it, from all rights reserved to public domain. We're not going to do public domain because the trademark issues associated with the license, of course, with the logo.
Yes, yeah. So that's a very, very blatant, very, very extreme example. But to give you an idea of the types of questions you think about in that terms of images. Images tend to be a lot more commonly no derivatives than other things, because especially if you have them or made them yourself in some ways, but there are some limitations to that. For text that I wrote, people could still quote me. That's fair use of anything, right? They could take my text, they could cite it, they could copy that, and they could put a quote from me in any book that they wanted to sell, for instance. That's completely usable. How would they want to use that text? There's a lot of ways, but what I really think is going to be the most common way is people are going to use that text in their book. and they're going to possibly modify the language. Maybe I wrote something and they think their students are going to need a little bit more explanation, so they might add a little sentence in there to clarify something that maybe I assume my students would know. Those sorts of things are ways that people might use it. Monetizing, like I said before, people might open wash something and make access to their homework tied to this book, and then they'll try to say it's a LibreText book, but whatever. It gets to be really complicated. So I honestly don't think there's a way they're going to monetize my text all by itself and attribute it to me in such a way that it will look like they're selling something worth any value. So I would probably just do share alike, meaning somebody can't take it and make it no derivatives. Someone can't take it and make it non-commercial. Just share it the same way it is, but feel free to use it in some way. And I'm just giving you my train of thoughts here. If I were to make a page with some of my material, some of other people's material that's licensed and then done that way, I would probably do the same thing. And I would do the same thing for everything else, to be honest. Because if I'm making these materials for the same logic that I've had before, it's really difficult to enforce any non-commercial things. It's very difficult for you to protect against all the nuances around that. Then I just tend to like people just to use it and then release it the exact same way that I've released it. And Delmar has said before when he's given this talk, and I will say the same thing. When I first started using OER, I had a large inclination to put non-commercial on everything. And that was my original book that I wrote when I was a graduate student with my boss. And Bob Belford, I met you when we were working on that book. And I wrote it and I put non-commercial on it. And that's where it is right now. But if I were to go back again, I would make that just CC by SA. Because of what I know now about how convoluted it is to really think about how could someone sell just that text. So I kind of restrict myself to non-commercial things that would be images that I really don't want people to change, and I don't want them to put on something and sell them. And otherwise, I tend to go with the same license for just about everything. Delmar, do you have any comments from your perspective on that you would change from that?
Well, the only thing I would mention is the word non-commercial requires a little bit of clarifications, because as the term is written, it suggests that any commercial activity is not allowed. It's actually technically not correct. It is any commercial activity in which profit is a component of. So any not-for-profit activity, for example, charging for costs, is perfectly allowed within any license that has the NC clause. So for example, we have a store system where any book that you create and host on our platform, you can actually purchase through Lulu, which is a print on demand. And we act as an intermediary, and we need money in order to pay for the printer in order to be able to generate it like that. So we ask the people who want the book to pay for it. We take it and then pass it off to the printer. We have a little bit in order to handle the supporting infrastructure, because that's not profit, but it's actually a money losing enterprise for us to be able to do, not even breaking even, but we do it because it's our mission. And that is still perfectly fine within the non-commercial clause that you have.
To answer your question, Joy, can you fork something in the conductor that's a resource that's non-derivative? No, you shouldn't be able to fork that, but you can add a paragraph above it or below it. You can't change the context of it, but if you wanted to add something on the end of it that goes into more detail about something you wanted to go into more detail, technically you can do that.
Yeah.
But you can't change the rules of the language or what the order of what was put there.
I mean, just to be clear, the infrastructure we have will fork anything, but you're not supposed to be editing it like what Justin mentioned. We will build a greater infrastructure inside in order to stop you from forking. Technically, you can take content and excise things around it in order to show a snippet that is non-commercial. So the editing isn't changing the content, it's removing all the other stuff in order to be able to make it work. And that is perfectly fine, although some people debate that in certain corners of the community.
So you'll notice there are a couple of them that I haven't used here at all, and I don't often use. I don't often use just CC by, and that's because if I want people to share the things the way that I shared them, that's just my own personal thing. If I released it to everybody to use it, I don't want you to modify it and then try to restrict it in any other form. So I don't tend to use that one. And like I said, I tend to not use non-commercial things for most texts, and I would never I don't think I would do non-commercial, no derivatives. So I would always do a share alike in that form. So I typically use share alike things. Last, this is complicated, it's busy, it's hard to sometimes figure that out. So there is a nice link that Creative Commons has for their chooser, and I put the link in the mastering page. If you don't see it, just click refresh. I didn't put it up there in the beginning because I didn't want anyone to use it to answer the previous exercise questions. So there is a link there if you refresh the Academy Online course in the mastering licensing, and then that license there. It's a quick little quiz kind of thing of like, how would you want things to be used? What kind of rules do you want? And then you can get those there. Yeah, there's very little protections for scraping anything.